Have you ever been tasked with imaging a Mac computer on a search or in your lab, but don't know where to start? In this video, we will be doing an introduction to imaging Mac computers. We will cover the triage process of determining the processor type, which will have an effect on the rest of the imaging process. The two likely CPUs you will see are the Intel chips or the Apple Silicon chips. Let's start off by discussing the CPUs which are found in Mac computers and how to identify which one your Mac has. It is important to find out the architecture of the CPU, as that will determine which options you can use to image the Mac you have at hand. There are only a few options for Macs which are running the Apple Silicon chips, which are the M1, M2, M3, and M4 processors. If the Mac is using an Intel processor, then your external boot options increases quite a bit. There are a few ways to identify the CPU that the target Mac contains. Method 1. Using the hardware. Try to locate the computer information on the physical computer. For a Mac laptop, it is usually on the bottom of the laptop. For a Mac computer, it's usually on the back of the machine. And for an iMac, it is usually imprinted on the bottom of the monitor stand. Once you have the A number and the EMC number, go to the website everymac.com, or you can use the app called MacTracker to look up the specs for that machine. With everymac.com, I can type in the A number and then the EMC number like A1990, EMC 3359, and then I will be presented with a bunch of ads on where you can buy that model of computer. Scroll down to the search results on everymac.com and then click on the link. You will be given information on the CPU. In this case, we are looking at an Intel Core i7. If I do a search again for A2442 EMC 3650, we see that the machine is using a M1 Pro or M1 Max processor. Let's repeat the same thing using the MacTracker app. You can do the same lookups for the EMC 3559 number, and I get the resulting page that will show you the processor of either a Intel Core i7 or i9. If I do a lookup of EMC 3650, I will see that it uses the Apple M1 Pro or M1 Max processor. Make sure that you capture the Model A number and the EMC number. A lot of folks only get the A number but don't bother with the EMC number. The EMC number is actually also an important part of determining the insides of a Mac, so don't neglect to obtain that info. An example is for the A2115. It can either be a 2019 or 2020 iMac, depending on whether the EMC number is 3194 or 3442. The biggest difference in these two systems is that the 2020 model has an Ethernet connector that can go up to 10 gigabits per second, whereas the 2019 model can only go up to 1 gigabit per second. So if speed of acquisition is important to you, then this is where knowing the EMC number will help. Method 2, using the operating system. If the computer is not password protected, you can click on the Apple at the top left of the screen at the menu bar, and then select About this Mac. A pop-up panel will show up, and you can see here that the processor is listed as a dual-core Intel Core i5. I'm going to go and do this process again on a different Mac, and this time notice that instead of saying processor, it says chip, and names the Apple M2 as the chip. So this is obviously the Apple Silicon chip instead of the Intel chip. Method 3, using the OS again. If the computer is not password protected, launch the System Information app under Applications and then System Information. Click on the word Hardware up on top here, and you can see the field named Processor name, which will tell you whether it is an Intel processor or Apple Silicon. And as you can see here, I am again looking at a Intel Core i7. And if I do this again on a different system, you can see now it says chip, and then it's the Apple M2. Method 4, using the terminal. And once again, if the computer is not password protected, you can launch the terminal app, and you can type the following command to get the processor type. system underscore profiler, and then SP hardware data type. And so you can see here that it says the processor is a Intel Core i7. The other command I can use is uname with a -P for processor option. And if it's a Intel box, then it'll say i386. And if I do this again on an Apple Silicon system, it will tell me that it's Apple Silicon. So typing system underscore profiler with the SP hardware data type argument will get the chip parameter instead of the processor parameter, followed by the name of the processor, which is in this case Apple M2. And I can type uname-P on an Apple Silicon machine, and the processor type that comes back says ARM, which means Apple Silicon, instead of i386, which is Intel. One of the main items that you will need to know when acquiring the image of a Mac computer is the processor of the computer, because that will determine the tools that you can use. Up until around late 2020, Macs were powered by an Intel chip, but then the Apple M1 chip was announced in November of 2020 and started to be the CPU for MacBook Airs, MacBook Pros, Mac Minis, and iMacs. The CPU changes things in a couple of different ways because security is now built into the CPU and no longer on a separate chip like the T2. The other change is that the forensic programs will need to be compiled to run on the Apple Silicon chips instead of the Intel chips. To learn how to use the Paladin bootable disk for imaging, see this video here. Make sure you click on the blue monkey to subscribe. Thanks for your time and happy hunting.